strength from day to day. It will never lose. It will never lose. It will never lose. Never lose its power. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear to him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his word and trust his grace, I'll cast on him my every care and wait for thee, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, may I thy consolation share, till from Mount Pisgah's lofty height I view my home and take my flight.
Sabbath, everybody. It's been a long day already. How about you? I forgot something. Be right back. This is my norm throughout the day. I forget at least one thing every single time I go anywhere. Has everybody had a good week? Anybody had an extremely long week? Yeah. Anybody had something really horrible happen this week? It is acceptable to say yes to that. They occasionally occur. I'm so glad no one here has had that today. We had some fun things happen this week. Miss Louise made it home from the hospital. Yes. And unfortunately, Lori and Jim are staying at home because somewhere they got exposed to COVID, so they're being cautious. And that's a beautiful thing. It's the designer cold. You know, it's a respiratory infection, just like pneumonia, and oh man, does it suck. I know, the poor flu has been kicked off the podium as being a terrible thing that no one ever wants anymore. It's still nothing anybody wants anymore. Are there any special prayer requests this morning? Yahoo! Go, Miss Nellie. I am so glad to hear your cancer is still gone. Yes. Oh, right. I love that. And I will give praises. My dad, who has been out of the hospital for a minute, is still out of the hospital. They did a thoracentesis on him like week before last because apparently his lung is still filling up, or around the lung sacs is still filling up with fluid, so they're draining it periodically. And this week he's breathing much better and walking around and getting to the gym, so there is marvelous improvement. Mom and I skipped the gym this week because we blamed it on Storm Debbie. Now, point of fun interest, my mom's name is Debbie. I wasn't going to drag her out in the wet. You know, I am mean to my mother on occasion, like making her get in the car and go to the doctor, but not all the time. Oh, and she did get to the doctor, and her A1C is down, so the chemical cocktail is working. Praise the Lord for science. Would you bow your heads with me, please, while we invite the presence of God? Dearest Father in heaven, thank you. Miss Nellie's cancer has been gone. Thank you, Miss Louise made it home from the hospital. Thank you that Dad and Mom are both doing pretty good. Dear Lord, please continue to be with us because there are folks on our prayer list that have not been mentioned at the moment who, well, they need your healing hand, Father, because you know how to do it. You're the one who made us. Dear Father in heaven, please be with Pastor's family. Losing a grandmama, you're kind of expecting it to happen, but it's not fun when it does occur. Please be with them. Dear Lord in heaven, may your presence be with us, and may our minds be open to what you would have us learn today. Amen. Well, let's go for a walk through the Bible, shall we? This week's lesson was all about Mark 7 and a little bit of Mark 8. So let's go through Mark 7. Now, to set the scene here, Jesus has been preaching for a little while because he's apparently notable enough that the scribes and the Pharisees are paying attention. And remember, John Mark is the millennial of his day. He was the one who'd lived under Roman occupation long enough that, well, that's just life as it is. And so he knew probably more than the couple of generations, Grandma and Grandpa did about the Roman gods and the Greek gods and the Greek way of doing an argument and a debate and all that kind of happy, I'm a college student, I know these things kind of things. Which gives us a neat insight into the generations, because we have that today. Well, I'm a college student, Mom, I know more than you. Oh, really? Who taught you that? So, in John, when we start out in John 7, okay, who here has the Bible, has a Bible with them? 1, 2. Okay, I'm definitely going to pick on you three. I'm going to start with you, if I may, please. Please, pretty please. Would you read Mark chapter 7, verse 1 through 5? It sounds like I'm giving you a whole bunch, but I'm giving you the narration at the beginning. Oh, and what is your name, please, ma'am?
Cheyenne.
Pleasure to meet you, Cheyenne. My name is Trish.
Okay, hey. So Mark chapter 7, verse 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
Then came together unto him the Pharisees, and certain of the scribes, which came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands oft, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots and brassen vessels, and of tables. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why walk not thy disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?
Okay. So, a lot like all the traditions we always find in a church, they have traditions. The original washing of the hands had to do with the priests in the sanctuary. Now, this is not to say that washing your hands before you eat is a bad idea. It's actually a really good one. Prevents germs, gets all the dirt off, so that you're not eating more than your peck of dirt in a lifetime. There are many wonderful things about washing your hands before you eat. What does it sound? Does it sound like? Okay. So the scribes and the Pharisees had taken a tradition of the priests and kind of widened it a little. Have we ever seen that before? Do we still see that today occasionally? In governing bodies, whether it's a church, whether it's a government, whether it's a school board, where they take a good idea, lose the entire spirit behind it, and then make it something to control. Is this a good idea? No. So, is this a lovely practice? Okay. Are there
Jackie
any
L.
practices
never
that we here in the Adventist
down on the ground.
faith have an unfortunate leaning toward doing that? I'm wondering if anybody has picked up on a tradition. While it may be a good idea, we make it more important than the 10. We may or we may not.
One of those I would want to mention is the area of ladies wearing hats. Ladies wearing hat.
Long ago and far away, when Mrs. White was writing, the culture at that time said that a lady always wore a hat. Always. This is before air conditioning. This is not as healthy a practice as it sounds. But you always wore a hat. And if you wore a big hat, that was nice. But if you wore a little hat, you were being risque. You've got to, and now, in our culture today, you have got to be kidding me. We are, so what biblical principles can we look to to be able to discern a difference between culture, between man's culture and God's culture, and what God finds important and what we're just tunnel visioning on. Are there any that we can look to?
I look through the Bible itself, and there is nothing that specifically states that a woman must wear a hat to cover her head. In fact, the Bible states that the hair is the covering of the head. But looking back at our culture and where we got it from the Europeans, the English in particular, they wore hats. And because some of us come from colonies that were colonized by Britain, we adopted that type of lifestyle. And so we impose it, literally impose it, on other persons and other church companies. But there is nothing that substantiates the fact that
Okay.
a lady coming to church must wear a hat.
Oh, I'm so pleased, because I have been hatless for a very long time. I actually have one hat, but you know. Now, my Aunt Mary adored hats, had several dozen of them. And when she passed on, her granddaughters and went through them and enjoyed them immensely. And that is a beautiful thing. The measuring rod that I usually use with anything, okay, when I'm being thoughtful about it, and this is a good thing for me to be more often, is it one of the 10? Because God's be-all, end-all is, okay, I gave you 10 rules. 4 are how you treat me well. 6 are how you treat other people well. And if you really want to know what's the basis of all 10, it's love people. Love me, love your neighbor. If we can keep that spirit, then we'll probably do, well, we can hope to do pretty well. Now, so Mark 7 is setting up a battle of minutiae, where it sounds to me, feel free, and I want other people to think about this. Christ is trying to say, I don't want you focused on the ritual, I want you focused on the concept behind it. I want you to think about the love of your fellow man and your love of God, and quit going through motions. Now, that's not to say that all motion is bad. It's not. If you're being led with a spirit trying to think of how to go further. If you're being led by a spirit of fulfilling, let me start that thought over again. There are rituals that can be very renewing. Having communion. If you're engaged in all of the tasks and you're thinking about what they point to and what they mean. I mean, that was the whole sanctuary service when it was established in a tent. I am showing you what's going to happen. The result of your sin is that something's got to die. Because there is no other penalty in God's kingdom. There is no 4 years in prison. There is no probation. There is no parole. If you've broken the rule, you die. That's it. But here is the way out. If someone commits a sacrifice, that can be used in place of you. And apparently this is not a new problem, because when Jesus is answering the Pharisees about, you try to convince people you're so terribly holy and religious. Jesus answers and says to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites." Now, Isaiah was not prophesying long in the future. He was actually talking to his generation at that moment in time, too. Isn't it neat how things can be applied more than once? "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men." That sounds like another yardstick that we can use. Is this rule found in the scriptures, or is it something that was made up outside of the scriptures? That's not to say that all rules that we have outside of the scriptures are evil and should be thrown out. But, once in a while you use it as a guideline instead of, "Oh my word, I'm going to die if I don't do this. If I don't wear a hat." Jesus continues, "For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things that you do." He said to them, "All too well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your tradition." Oh, that's a bad thing. What is the very definition of blasphemy? I'm not answering this question. I'm asking, how do we define blasphemy?
Taking the prerogatives of God, saying your sins, have the ability to take
I'm going to ask you to
of,
repeat that so that the guys on the internet can hear it.
Yes, ma'am. Taking the prerogatives of God, or saying you have the power to forgive sin, or the power to change God's laws. I think also that might be the unpardonable sin, blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. That's
Okay. And I'm sorry, what is your name, sir?
my name is Kurt.
Hi, Kurt. I'm Trish.
Good morning, Miss Trish.
I am so happy to see you all today. So, what Christ just accused them of, you've put the traditions of men in place of the commandments of God. That's a pretty heavy charge, isn't it? For someone who says that they're honoring God. Do you think that the scribes and Pharisees who were listening to him at that moment got that what he was accusing them of was blasphemy?
All that they tell you to do, you do it. All that the Pharisees, Christ said, all that the Pharisees tell you to do, all of it, you do it. But don't do as they do, because they strain in a gnat, swallow a camel. But I find that fascinating how he told them, everything those Pharisees tell you to do, you do it, because they sit in the seat of Moses. I hope I quoted it right.
Okay. So he wasn't quite telling them that you're blaspheming by having the rule. He's saying you're not doing it with the spirit that it needs to be done. You don't have the love of God in it. Okay, well that's a little less, a slightly smaller whip, we hope, or belt to beat you on the butt with. Hey, I grew up in the era where mommy did that. And I think we turned out the better for it. Anyway, moving on. It says, "For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death." So but you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you may have received from me is Corban, that is gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother, making the word of God no effect through your tradition which you have handed down, and many such things you do. Now, I don't think Christ is talking here about saying mean things to your mom and dad. What he's referring to as a gift where you would have taken care of mom and dad is they did not have a nursing home system back then. When mom and dad got old, they stayed in the house with you and you took care of them until they died. That was what you did. So if there was a tradition where, well, mom and dad, I can't possibly take care of you because I'm giving money to the temple. What root does it sound like that's coming from? You know, what's behind allowing that tradition, do we think? Mr. Leonard, what does it sound like the temple folk were saying, well, you know, you don't have to spend all that money on mom and dad if you're giving it to the temple.
I guess it sounds like to me that the priests and Pharisees or the temple officers wanted you to put their needs before the needs of your parents. They were making an excuse, you know, to take the funds for the support of the temple instead of supporting your parents. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
I agree. That's where it's sounding like to me. Now, humans being humans, like humans have been since, Adam and Eve, would it sound reasonable in your ear that if someone gave lots of money to the temple would look on them favorably? Buying influence. We've seen that today. So apparently it's been around a long time, as unsavory as a tradition as it may be. When Jesus had called all the multitude to himself, he said to them, "Hear me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of him are those things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." Now that little line they would have recognized from Isaiah, because he used it a goodly bit, and other prophets did too. Do you really think he's talking about food here, based on the context of everything that has just gone on? He's talking about the little minutiae, or at least that's what he's been talking about. So the context is all the nitpickety little rules that we come up with for ourselves that aren't part of the 10. That's not what causes you to lose your, well, okay. It can cause, that's not what I'm asking of you. That's not what makes you unclean in my eyes. What you need is the spirit within you of trying to follow me. Or at least that's what I'm getting. Does anyone else get something different from this passage? Okay. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he says to them, "Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? What the world does to you isn't what defiles you."
What about eating pork? I wondered about that when I read the list.
See, that's the thing. Those people who want to say, see, God said we can eat pork, point to this, and then they're also going to point to a passage where Peter had a dream that had nothing to do with the dinner table. You know what? It's probably, when God gave us those rules, I agree they're not part of the 10. What I also can tell you is that what we know today about a pig is that it is the closest DNA to any creature or to us. It's like just a couple of little sequences off, which is why forensics labs use it to try and figure out how the ballistics of the bullet went through in the victim that they're not going to try and shoot up anymore.
But you know the question people are asking me, is bacon pork?
Okay, that goes to a whole other problem in our culture where we no longer know where our food comes from. And that's a whole different rant. To my mind, it's a worthy rant, but we definitely need more cooking classes in our culture so that we know where things come from. But when God gave us those rules about the clean and the unclean meats, what we're finding with science today is the ones that he ruled unclean are the ones that are the most bad for us. The shellfish that he said, look, don't eat that. Well, now, whenever we have a heavy metal warning, what's most of the heavy metal in when it's coming from the sea? It's from the crustaceans at the very bottom. So I have a sneaking suspicion that when God declared things unclean way back when at Mount Sinai, he was trying to set up a culture of healthy living for his kids right then. When you're raising toddlers, do you give them really simple rules or really complex ones? So he's dealing with them where they have not had a really regular worship service for a couple generations. So he's giving them the real simple stuff. This is clean, this is unclean. This is, you are pure before my eyes. This is, you are defiled before my eyes. I have a sneaking, okay, this is my sneaking suspicion. If anybody else has another thought on the matter, hey, this is the perfect time to bring it up. That when he was talking about the foods, that was his idea. Do I still think it's a good idea to do the clean and unclean meat? Yeah. Because I am not horrifically worried about, because God asked me to do it, I am willing to do it. And he actually asked because it's written there. So I'm like, okay, this isn't one of the rabbis came up with 6 million laws so that they could have their names somewhere on the books. This is, you asked me not to eat that, okay. Later on down through history, Ellen White said, you know, it's probably a better idea to be a vegetarian than to eat meat. There's going to be some goofy stuff in that meat by the end of the day. So, and for me, I was raised vegetarian, so it's easy enough for me to skip the beasties, And besides which, I'm really a bad carnivore. The only way I can get that stuff past my eyes is if you grind it up beyond recognition, and it's the really unhealthy stuff once you do that anyway. Now, that's not to say that I don't occasionally indulge in a burger, but that's not my whole religion. I am trying to be a healthy person versus eating a lot of junk food person.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize that the flavor that you receive in eating meat comes from the blood and the urine.
I did not know about the urine part. The blood part I was a little familiar with.
The blood, that comes from...
And we're actually supposed to wash that out pretty good, because again, you're talking about the DNA, you're talking about bloodborne pathogens that are in the blood, you're talking about a lot of things that are just
But you-
really not good for you.
But you'd wash that out, and you'd take the good flavor out.
Again, raised vegetarian, so I like my veggies anyhow.
I was just curious, you said occasionally you indulge in a burger. What did you mean by that?
There are times when I am really, really bad about eating regularly. And so if both my arms and my legs are hollow, yeah, I will stop and grab something that is a high protein.
But not a real hamburger, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you are a vegetarian, but occasionally, once in a while, you're not.
I'm a
Okay.
bad carnivore. You know. And if that really distresses anyone, I apologize. You know. And when mommy says, I want a hot dog, the answer is yes, ma'am. We do work with stick with the beef, stick with, when it's the fishies, they have to have the fins and the scales, because we were the only Adventists in our family, my nuclear family, mom, dad, the 3 kids. So when we went to grandma's house and grandpa's house and, well, the in-laws, and were with the cousins, then you were not so rude as to say, no, Grandpa, I'm not going to eat the hamburger that you just made for me. Oh, no. Because that breeds a whole other unloving way to approach people. So go back to the general principle. When God said, you love me, you love the fellow man. So we measure by the most loving way to approach our fellow man.
But you know what? If you go back in history, when the Lord brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, one of the things that he wanted to do that was important was to change their diet.
I heartily agree.
More healthy living, yeah.
Now, I will give you another example, and we are running way down a rabbit hole, but it's a fun rabbit hole. Again, approaching with a loving heart people that we encounter. If ever there was a time that I was invited to someone's house to eat dinner, and I could clearly see that they were not well off, that they were scraping together everything that they had to give me something that they considered to be the best that they could. I don't care what it is. The answer is thank you very much, and I will take a portion. It doesn't have to be a huge portion. And if they pile it on my plate and I share it with the little ones because, well, I am so full. There are loving ways to be with our neighbor. Now, later on down the road, will I explain that, well, in general, I don't do this. And here's why. Christ met the people where they were at and then tried to lift them up from there. I heartily agree with a healthy lifestyle, which also includes don't eat quite so much refined sugar, don't eat quite, try to avoid the caffeine. Again, it's not one of the 10. Is it better for us? Absolutely. If we make that the religion, though, and that actually ties right into this point, are we making the minutiae more important than the principle of loving God and loving our fellow man?
But at the same time, there's 100 ways to say something, but some of those 100 ways is respectful and nice.
This is true. I think that there is absolutely ways to be diplomatic. In the example that I gave you, if someone had gone out of their way to invite me to an Easter dinner and they had a ham and that was the only thing that was on the table, because that's literally all they could afford, I take a portion, I take a couple of bites, and I say thank you. Because it is more important to be, to my mind, and opinions can vary. It is more important to be loving to that person than to go, well, I don't eat that because that's pork. So, go for it.
I think you can lovingly say that I do not eat pork because it's biblical and explain that in a loving way. without taking portion.
Okay,
That's my opinion.
go for it.
I agree because you're thinking about not compromising. And the first thing that came to my mind was Daniel, when he purposed in his heart, not to basically disrespect God. And how they do that is, like Brother Donald mentioned, is you say it out of kindness. And the fact that they were able to eat, their own kind of food that helped them to strengthen.
Okay.
And to be able to kind of minister to them and preach to them in regards to that.
I absolutely agree with you. In the case of someone who definitely has plenty, he was sitting at the king's table. This was not a pauper where he was sitting at, where the only thing that they could afford was this, that, or the other. So in the case of where I'm at a table with lots and lots and lots, oh, that's easy. I just take I take this, I take that, and if they have oysters and ham and every other thing on the table, I can pick around that. Been doing it my whole life. And then also providing if anyone notices that I'm not taking the extra special delicacies, then I can explain, because this is a table with plenty. This is a table where, they can afford to have different things on there. And and there are different ways to be respectful.
I don't think you can qualify compromise.
Okay.
I think Jesus might have been trying to say you're focused too much on your traditions, tithing the mint and the cumin and all these other things, and they were being distracted by their traditions instead of, taking care of the widows and feeding the homeless and loving their neighbor as their self. I think that's what he meant was they were focused so much on their traditions of, legalism, they were forgetting to love their neighbor as themselves. I think that's maybe what he meant.
Thank you so much for dragging us right back to the point. Outstanding. Well done. Because yes, I was doing a poor job of leading us back to that. Oh, no. I appreciate it. So Christ was saying, and no, I don't think he was advocating for just eat whatever you feel like. He was literally talking about, are you thus without understanding? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and it's eliminated, thus purifying all food? What comes out of a man, that defiles a man. When you're saying the mean things about your neighbor, when you're saying, calling your wife names, when you're putting your kids down, that's what's defiling someone. For from within, out of the heart of man proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. He really is talking more about the spirit than things that are really tactile at this point. Or at least that's the sense that I'm getting from this passage. Is anyone else getting something different from it? Okay. Oh, let's see. We've got 5 minutes, but I think we're going to attack it anyway. So on that note, where he's talking about the things that come out of a man are what really, really taint someone. Now, and here's something revolutionary about Christ. He did not think that men and women were on different planes. He knew that the daughters of God were just as important as the sons of God. And he knew that all the people on the earth were the children of God because God had created them, from the beginning. They all came from Adam, and then they all came from Noah, because it kind of winnowed and then expanded. So the racism that existed back then, and if you think we got it now, oh honey, we are amateurs compared to this. If you were a Roman citizen, you could walk over anybody. The barbarians were considered barbarian and looked down on by the Romans. The Eastern, if you have not seen racism until you've seen Chinese and Japanese get together. Oh, they can show us a thing or two about that. And if we could actually learn from it, that would be a lovely thing. So way back when, in the place where Christ was walking around, you were a Jew or you were a Gentile. We're to be in the world but not of the world. We have to have a barrier around everyone because we have to think we're better than everyone else. I wonder, have we ever grown out of that? From there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. She's kowtowing. I mean, she's literally groveling at his feet. The woman was a Greek. So she's not supposed to be there because she's a she, and she's not supposed to be there because she is a Gentile. This is all kinds of bad for Jewish tradition. And she kept asking Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now Jesus says to her, Let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And she answers, Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat the crumbs from the children's, or eat from the children's crumbs. She would not be dissuaded by this apparent racism. She says, no. I get the blessings of God too because I am his child too. Or I am at least in the hierarchy. Yes, there are the children and I'm not one of the children, but I'm at least one who gets things that fall down on the floor. I can just picture Christ smiling. Oh, look, somebody gets it. He said to her, For this saying, go your way. The demon has gone from your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out, and her daughter lying on the bed. This is a cautionary tale. The insiders in scriptures so frequently get it wrong. And what we call the outsiders are so frequently getting it right. It is important to measure what we consider to be important by the scriptures. Would you bow your heads with me, please? Dearest Father in heaven, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for continuing to be with us while we worship you. Dear Lord, amen. And thank you all for being here for our walk. Huh? Well, it's important for us to have a few head scratchers every now and then. Happy Sabbath, everyone, and I hope you all stay for potluck later.
Sabrina, my love. My arm's not that long. Oh, just sit there. Okay.
Jackiel never imagined he would be lying face down on the ground, covered in blood, fighting for his life.
It all started 3 years ago, when I was already hanging out with friends that weren't real friends. They weren't the right friends. I did things and saw things that I never should have had to. I'm not going to lie. It's dangerous like any place. Houses next to each other, many children and a lot of crime. Many young people. And the most common thing is selling drugs and things like that. That's the general environment.
Jackiel had gotten himself involved in some of those activities.
Because of those things, because of those mistakes, I suffered the consequences.